The prairie stretched out like an ocean of earth, waves of tall grass bending beneath the slow breath of dawn. The first light touched everything with a pale gold, as though the heavens had spilled their paint too gently, leaving the world in soft tones of silver and amber. There were no church bells out here, no music except for the steady hum of wind against wood, the distant cry of a hawk, the muffled heartbeat of hooves in the dust. It was a land of silence and of struggle. And into that silence came two figures, a boy and his sister, walking along the old wagon road that cut across the plains like a scar. Their shadows stretched long behind them, fragile shapes stretched too thin, like children who had been asked to carry more than their years could hold. The boy was hardly more than 12. His boots were worn through at the toes, patched once, twice, patched again until the leather itself seemed tired of holding together. Dust had settled into his hair, which had once been bright but now was dulled like sun-bleached straw. He carried no gun, no pack worth speaking of, only the stubborn hope that perhaps the next mile would be kinder than the last. The girl beside him, his sister, though she looked old enough to be mistaken for his mother in the harshness of her gaze, was 17 by calendar, but the prairie had aged her into something older. Her back was straight, her chin lifted, but her eyes gave her away. They were the eyes of someone who had seen too much leaving, too many doors closed, too many hands let go. There was strength in her, yes, but it was the kind of strength built on grief, brittle, aching, yet unyielding. The boy stumbled, and she caught his arm before he fell. "You got to stay upright," she murmured, though her voice was soft, almost lost to the wind. "If we fall here, there's no one to lift us up." He nodded, but he was tired. Children tire quickly when the world asks too much. They walked on, each step carrying them farther from what little home they once had, deeper into the emptiness of the frontier. By noon, the sun pressed down like a weight. Heat shimmered off the ground, and the horizon quivered as though the land itself were breathing. The boy's lips cracked. He asked if there would be water soon, and she had no answer. Instead, she took his hand. Her fingers were rough, but the touch was steady. Somewhere beyond the heat haze, a figure watched. The rancher. He stood by the fence of his land, the rails weathered and gray, leaning like old men who had seen too many winters. He was not young. His hair had long since turned the color of smoke, his beard trimmed short more for necessity than vanity. His hands, wide and scarred, rested on the top rail. His eyes followed the two children as they moved slow across the prairie. He said nothing, not to the horse behind him, not to the wind, not even to himself. He only watched. The boy noticed first a shadow in the distance, a figure still as stone. He tugged at his sister's sleeve. "Someone's there." She squinted, shielding her brow. A man, standing where the land ended and the fence began. She felt her chest tighten. Men on the frontier could be salvation or ruin, and there was little way of knowing which until it was too late. But they had no strength left to turn back. The boy, always braver in his innocence than she in her wisdom, whispered with a voice trembling but determined, "Maybe he can take you instead of me." The words startled her. She turned almost sharply. "What do you mean?" His eyes were wet, though he tried to blink them clear. "You're strong. You can help him. I'm just trouble. If someone has to stay behind, let it be you. Maybe he'll take you, and I'll keep walking." Her throat closed. She wanted to scold him, to tell him never to speak such foolishness again, but the words would not come. Instead, she knelt in the dust and took his face in her hands. His cheeks were warm, burning with sun and shame. "You're not a burden," she whispered. "You're all I have left." But children do not always believe what love tells them. When they reached the fence line, the rancher did not move. He was a wall, tall and broad, silent as the post he leaned on. The boy stared up at him, chest heaving, and in a small voice, one that tried to sound brave but cracked with fear, he said again, "Can you take her instead of me?" The prairie seemed to hold its breath. The hawk above stilled in the sky. The grass bent without sound. Even the horse behind the rancher lowered its head, as if listening. The rancher said nothing. His eyes shifted between the boy and the girl. He saw the hunger, the dust caked to their skin, the threadbare shoes, the tremor in the boy's hands, the fire in the girl's gaze that dared him to judge her. He said nothing still, but he opened the gate. He stepped aside, silent, and with the smallest tilt of his head, he beckoned them through. The boy blinked, uncertain. The girl hesitated, her body taut with suspicion. But silence, when it comes from the right soul, can be louder than any word. And so they passed through. The gate closed behind them, and something in the air shifted. Inside the ranch yard, life moved slower. The old boards of the barn creaked in the breeze. Chickens clucked, curious but unafraid. The horse stamped its hoof against the dry earth. Everything felt heavy with use, but not abandoned. The rancher walked ahead, leading them toward the house. His boots pressed the dirt steady, each step like a drumbeat. The boy whispered to his sister, "Do you think he'll keep us both?" She didn't answer. She didn't know. The rancher's silence was not cruel, but it was impenetrable, like stone cliffs standing against wind. She studied him, the slope of his shoulders, the wear of his hat, the way he neither hurried nor slowed. There was no judgment in his face, only a kind of tired patience. When they reached the porch, he paused, glanced back at them. His eyes lingered on the boy, then on her. He lifted one hand, not in command, but in invitation, and pushed open the door. The smell of wood smoke and coffee drifted out, warm and startling after so many miles of dust. The boy rushed forward. The girl followed more slowly, as though each step might betray her into some new heartbreak. Behind them, the prairie stretched wide and empty, the road vanishing into the horizon like a memory dissolving. Ahead of them, the house stood firm, weathered but whole. They had crossed a threshold. That night, as the prairie cooled and stars unfolded across the sky like spilled salt, the boy lay on a cot inside, his breathing deep, finally surrendered to sleep. His sister sat by the window, her face touched by the pale blue of moonlight. She could still hear his words echoing. "Can you take her instead of me?" The rancher was somewhere outside, tending to the last of the chores, his lantern moving slow along the fence line. She watched him from the window, wondering what kind of man chooses silence over speech, what kind of heart offers shelter without demand. And though she did not yet know it, this silence would one day save them all. Morning came soft and gold, poured gentle over the hills like honey slipping slow from a jar. The prairie was quiet, the kind of quiet that made you wonder if the world itself was still waking. Inside the ranch house, the boy stirred before his sister. He opened his eyes to a ceiling made of rough-hewn beams, to the faint crackle of coals in the hearth, to the scent of flour and wood smoke. For a moment, he did not know where he was, and then he remembered the man, the gate, the silence. He turned, and there she was, his sister, curled on a narrow bed the rancher had cleared for her. Her face in sleep looked younger, less lined with care. He wanted to keep her like that forever, untouched by fear, but children cannot guard their elders, not truly. A floorboard groaned. The rancher was at the table, pouring water into a tin cup. His movements were steady, unhurried. He glanced at the boy, gave a nod, but said nothing. The boy hesitated, then whispered, "Thank you." The rancher gave another nod. Silence was his language, and it was enough. By mid-morning, the sister awoke. She did not speak at first. She sat upright, smoothed her dress, tied her hair back with a strip of faded cloth. She looked about the room, as though searching for some hidden condition, a price written on the walls, a demand carved into wood. Finding none, she rose, and with quiet dignity, asked if she might help. The rancher studied her a moment, then pointed toward the kitchen. Flour, water, salt, the makings of bread. She set to work. Her hands were clumsy at first. City kitchens, when she had known them, were not like this. But soon the rhythm of kneading steadied her. The dough stretched beneath her palms, pliant and alive. It was a small thing, but when the bread began to bake, the smell filled the house, warm and human, and even the rancher's still eyes softened. For the first time in weeks, the boy laughed, a small laugh, unburdened at the way the flour had dusted his sister's cheek. That laugh broke something open. The ranch had its ways of testing newcomers. Work lay heavy here, endless as the horizon. Fences mended themselves to no man's schedule. Horses needed gentling. Fields begged for water. The boy, eager to prove his worth, followed the rancher to the stables. He was given no words of instruction, only tools pressed into his hands, the weight of expectation hanging heavier than iron. At first he fumbled. A nail bent crooked, a hammer slipped. But the rancher did not scold. He simply waited, patient as stone, until the boy tried again, and again, and again, until the nail drove true. It was then the boy understood. The man's silence was not emptiness. It was trust. The sister, too, found her place. She gathered eggs, patched torn clothes, swept dust from corners that had long since surrendered to it. She did not complain, though her back ached and her hands reddened. She carried herself with quiet pride, as though daring the world to see her not as a burden, but as someone capable. The rancher noticed. He noticed the way she carried her brother's portion to him first. He noticed the way she kept her shoulders square, even when tired. He noticed how she never asked for rest, only offered more. But he said nothing. There were others, too, who took note. An old ranch hand came by in the evenings, a man named Earl, skin leathered by sun, beard the color of dried wheat. He watched the girl gathering wood one evening and said in a voice worn but kind, "You remind me of the mustangs that run wild north of here. Strong but not mean. Skittish if you corner them, but free when you let them be." She smiled faintly, unsure how to take the words. But Earl only tipped his hat and went on, as though he had simply spoken a truth carried by the wind. There was also Mrs. Calder, a neighbor widow who came by once a week with a loaf of rye or a jar of pickled beans. She studied the girl with the sharp eyes of someone who had raised 6 children and buried 2. She said little, but one evening, after leaving bread, she pressed the girl's hand in hers and whispered, "The world breaks us, but we can stitch ourselves back." The girl felt that thread pull tight in her chest. One afternoon, the boy was given the chance to ride. The rancher led out a calm mare, chestnut-colored, her mane braided against the wind. The boy's eyes lit up with a fire she had not seen in weeks. He climbed awkwardly, nearly slipped, but the rancher's hand steadied him, a hand large and scarred, yet gentle. No words, only the weight of quiet assurance. The boy rode across the yard, laughter spilling from him, ringing brighter than any bell. His sister stood at the fence, her heart swelling, tears pricking though she forced them back. It had been so long since she had heard him laugh like that. And when she glanced toward the rancher, she saw him watching too, his face unreadable, but his eyes softened by something she could not yet name. The days stretched into weeks. The prairie changed with the light, gold at dawn, white with heat by noon, lavender at dusk. Nights grew cooler, stars wheeling endless above, their cold fire watching all below. The boy grew stronger. He began to fetch water, to haul wood, to mend fences with hands no longer trembling. The girl, too, found a rhythm, her body leaning into the work, her spirit slowly unclenching. And the rancher remained as he always was, steady, silent, a man who spoke with action instead of words. But in the quiet moments, by the firelight or in the slow hum of evening, the girl felt something stirring. Not love, not yet. Something simpler, rarer, safety. Safety like a blanket wrapped around weary shoulders. Safety like the knowledge that tomorrow might come without loss. She had not felt that in years. One night, after supper, the boy fell asleep early, his small body curled on the cot. The girl sat by the table, mending a tear in his shirt. The rancher was across from her, oil lamp casting shadows on the walls. She could feel his eyes on her, not in hunger, not in judgment, but in quiet observation. She lifted her gaze, met his for a moment. Her voice broke the silence. "Why do you keep us?" The question hung heavy. The rancher did not answer. He turned his gaze toward the window, where the prairie lay black beneath the stars. He sipped his coffee, set the cup down, and the silence stretched longer still. At last he spoke, his voice low, worn with years. "Because you were at the gate." And that was all. She lowered her head, returned to her stitching. But the words echoed in her chest, soft as the lamp glow, strong as the land itself. The prairie outside whispered through the night. Coyotes sang in the distance, their cries weaving with the rustle of grass. The boy dreamed of horses. The girl dreamed of a world where her brother might never again have to ask, "Can you take her instead of me?" And though she did not yet know it, the rancher's silence was not emptiness. It was promise, a promise that would soon be tested. The prairie has its seasons of trial. It gives just enough warmth to lull you, just enough beauty to trick you into thinking the land is gentle. But the frontier always tests its keepers. Sooner or later, the sky will darken, the wind will howl, and the earth will remind you that nothing here is yours, only borrowed. It was late summer when the storm came. It began as a hush, a stillness too perfect, too heavy. Birds vanished. The cattle grew restless, their movements sharp and uneasy. The boy, standing by the corral, felt the air shift, hot, then suddenly cool like a breath drawn in and never released. His sister stepped out onto the porch, her eyes searching the horizon. The sky had begun to bruise, purple swelling against gold. The rancher was already moving. He gathered rope, pulled his hat low, his silence sharpened into urgency. The boy felt panic stir in his chest, but the man's calm steadied him. "It will pass," his sister whispered, though her own voice shook. But the prairie never promises mercy. The storm broke with violence. Wind lashed the grass flat. Lightning tore open the heavens. Rain came in sheets, so heavy the land blurred. The barn doors groaned under the force. The fences buckled. A tree split with a sound like gunfire. The boy clung to his sister's arm, but she pulled free and ran to the rancher's side. Together, they fought to fasten the gates, their hands slick, ropes burning their palms. The rancher moved like stone in the storm, unyielding, his silence an anchor. She matched him stride for stride, grit for grit, until the rain soaked her dress through and mud clung to her skirts like chains. The boy watched through the blur of water, his heart torn between fear and awe. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the ranch battered but still standing. The fences leaned crooked, shingles had torn free, the cattle were scattered, but they were alive. The girl collapsed on the porch steps, her breath ragged, her hands raw. The rancher stood above her, water dripping from his hat, chest heaving but steady. Their eyes met, and in that moment she saw it clearly. He had not sheltered them out of pity. He had stood beside her because he recognized something in her, a strength, a will to fight, a fire that would not be smothered. And she, in turn, saw him as more than a silent figure. She saw the steadiness beneath, the roots that held firm when all else threatened to break. But storms do not only come from the sky. There are storms made of whispers, too. Word had spread through the town, about the girl who had turned up at the ranch, about her brother, about the man who kept them both. Folks have long memories for scandal and empty afternoons for gossip. Some said she was a stray, taken in only to be cast out. Some said she was clever, scheming to lay claim to land and roof by way of her youth. Others whispered worse, words meant to stain her name before it had even been spoken. The boy heard first. He had gone into town with Earl for supplies. He had lingered near the well when two women passed, their voices sharp as needles. "Poor man," one said. "You don't know what he's let in. She'll ruin him sure as rain," the other replied. "Mark my words." The boy's chest tightened. He wanted to shout that they were wrong, that his sister was good, that she was all he had, but his throat closed, and he fled. When he returned to the ranch, he was quiet, too quiet. That night, when the lamp was low and the rancher had gone to his room, the boy turned to his sister. His voice trembled. "Maybe I should go. Maybe you should only keep you. I'm just trouble." The words were a knife to her heart. "Don't ever say that," she whispered fiercely, pulling him into her arms. "You're not trouble. You're the reason I wake each morning." But the boy's eyes were wet with shame. The rancher had heard. He was a man who kept to silence. But this time, silence was not enough. The next morning, when the boy went out to the corral, the rancher followed. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, steady and firm. The boy froze, staring up at him, waiting for judgment. The rancher's voice came low, rough from disuse, but clear. "Both. The boy blinked. "I take both," the rancher said. "Not one. Not instead. Both." The boy's lips trembled. His eyes widened. And then he broke into tears, the storm of guilt washing free. The rancher did not move, only let the boy weep against the silence of his chest. Words had never been his way, but those two, "I take both," were enough to bind what the prairie had nearly torn apart. That night, the girl sat by the fire, sewing a rip in her brother's coat. The rancher sat across from her, whittling wood into the shape of some small, unspoken thing. She lifted her gaze. "He's all I have," she said softly. "If the world took him, I don't think I'd have the strength to stand." The rancher looked at her, his eyes reflecting the glow of firelight. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he set the carving down. "You stood in the storm," he said. "That's strength." She looked away, her throat tight. Strength doesn't keep you warm. But as the fire crackled and the boy stirred in sleep beside them, she realized warmth had already found her. Not in romance, not in promises, but in the quiet truth of being seen. The prairie does not allow peace to last untested. Beyond the horizon, danger stirred. Bandits, hungry men with hollow eyes, had begun to roam the edges of ranchland, desperate for cattle, for coin, for anything they could take. The girl did not yet know it, but the storm of whispers was only the beginning. A greater trial was coming, one that would demand not just strength but choice. And in that choice, the rancher's silence would break, not into words, but into action. Autumn crept over the prairie like a slow shadow. The grass dulled to straw, the wind carried a colder bite, and the days shortened until the evenings arrived before anyone was ready. The ranch seemed to breathe heavier with each passing dusk, as though it too felt the weight of winter drawing near. But it was not winter that came first. It was men. They rode in at sundown, 3 of them, their horses lean and restless, their faces hollowed by hunger and greed. Dust rose behind them like smoke, and the boy, feeding chickens near the barn, froze when he saw them. His sister came running at a shout, her heart hammering. The rancher stepped out from the stable, hat low, hands calm but ready. He did not speak. He only stood, solid as a gatepost, between the riders and his home. The leader was a thin man, his eyes sharp and mean. His voice carried across the yard. "We're talking a few head of cattle. You've got plenty. We ain't a skin." The rancher said nothing. His silence was a wall, and silence is dangerous to men who expect fear. The boy clutched his sister's hand, whispering, "Don't let them take you. Please, don't let them." The leader sneered at the sight of them. "2 strays. That's what you've got here. More mouths than you need. Maybe we'll take one of them instead." The girl stepped forward, her shoulders stiff, her voice trembling but strong. "Take me then. Leave the boy." The boy cried out, the same plea he had spoken before, though this time it tore from him like a wound. "Can you take her instead of me?" The words split the evening. Even the wind seemed to stop. The rancher's silence shattered. No, it was not a roar. It was not loud, but it struck harder than any gunshot. "No," the rancher said again, his voice low, steady as the earth. "You take neither. You take nothing." The men laughed, but it was a hollow laugh, a laugh that covered fear. They saw in his eyes what words could not carry, that this man would not bend, would not break, that the silence which had wrapped him for years now stood like a fortress, and he would defend what was his. Guns glinted. The boy clung tighter to his sister. The girl stood tall, her chin lifted, though her knees trembled. And then the standoff broke. Not with words, not with surrender, but with action. The rancher moved like stone come alive, swift, unyielding. He seized the rifle from the nearest man, disarmed him with a force that knocked dust into the air. The boy screamed. The girl lunged forward as though to shield him, but the rancher's presence filled the yard like thunder. The other 2 hesitated, their courage faltering. They had expected weakness, not a wall of will. For a moment, the world balanced on the edge of violence. And then, like the storm that comes and passes, the moment broke. The men fled, spitting curses, their horses carrying them into the wide, empty dark. When the dust settled, the ranch yard was silent again. The boy was sobbing, clinging to his sister, words tumbling out between breaths. I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it. I don't want them to take you. I don't want to go. She held him, her own tears falling. You'll never be alone. Not while I breathe. The rancher stood nearby, chest heaving, eyes shadowed but steady. For the first time, he spoke more than a word, his voice rough as gravel, yet tender in its weight. You belong here. Both of you. This is your home now. The girl lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes through the blur of tears. And in that gaze, something passed between them. Not the fever of romance, but something deeper, steadier. The recognition of two souls who had walked alone too long and had finally found where they could rest. The days that followed were different. The boy laughed more easily, his shoulders lighter. He no longer spoke of leaving. He began to ride without fear, to mend fences with pride, to sing to himself when he thought no one listened. The girl, too, softened. Her steps grew less guarded, her smile less rare. She still carried her scars, but she carried them now as proof, not as shame. And the rancher, he remained a man of few words, but his silence was no longer empty. It was full of promise, full of presence, full of the quiet vow he had made beneath that stormed sky, to take both and never let go. One evening, as autumn tipped toward winter, the three of them sat together on the porch. The prairie stretched endless before them, the horizon painted in the fire of sunset. The boy leaned against his sister, half asleep, his small body warm and safe. The girl turned to the rancher. You never asked us for anything, she said softly. Why? He looked out across the land, his face carved in shadow and light. After a long moment, he answered, because some things you don't earn. Some things you just take hold of, and you keep. She felt her heart stir, not with fear, not with doubt, but with the strange, steady warmth of belonging. The prairie night fell, stars blooming across the dark like wildflowers in spring. Coyotes sang in the distance, and the wind whispered through the grass. Inside the ranch house, the boy dreamed of horses and laughter. His sister dreamed of dawns that no longer frightened her. And the rancher, sitting watch beneath the endless sky, dreamed not at all. He simply breathed, steady and unyielding, as though at last he was no longer alone. And so the story closes, not with fanfare, not with thunder, but with truth. Family is not always born of blood. Sometimes it is chosen. Sometimes it is the quiet hand that steadies you in a storm, the silence that shelters you when words are not enough. Sometimes it is the voice that says both when the world insists on instead. And perhaps, dear listener, you know this truth too. Perhaps you've been carried by it, or perhaps you're still waiting to find it. But take heart. The prairie is wide, and the night is long, but there are ranchers still, steady souls who will open the gate and take you in. If this story touched you, if you felt the dust and the storm and the quiet of this land in your heart, then stay with us. Like, share, leave your thoughts below, and tell me, from where in this wide world are you listening? For stories like this belong not to one fire, but to every hearth where hearts are searching for truth.